When the Jujutsu Kaisen anime first premiered in 2020, it instantly became a hit. Its manga sales skyrocketed, placing well within the top-selling manga of the year for years on end. It received a sequel anime season, and even a feature film spin-off. And with that success, it wasn't long until notorious anime game publisher Bandai Namco got its grubby little fingers on the license and released Jujutsu Kaisen's very first home console game, Cursed Clash. It released exactly 2 years ago from this video's upload date on February 2nd, 2024, and on release it was a disaster. It was critically panned for a number of valid reasons, such as its poor gameplay, cheap visuals, and underwhelming content. It quickly became a meme and ultimately fell into obscurity. Just another in a long line of anime cash grab games. But what those who, rightfully, abandoned the game on launch missed was that Bandai and developer Viking were regularly releasing DLC and free updates in a desperate attempt to keep this game relevant. But did they actually do anything to fix this game? Is it worth it 2 years later? Or was Bandai Namco and Viking just putting a band-aid on a bullet wound and hoping to milk the franchise as much as possible? This is the tragedy of Jujutsu Kaisen Cursed Clash. The game was first announced on July 1st, 2023 at Anime Expo, and it was already getting clowned on. It was revealed to be a 2v2 arena fighting game, and by 2023, most anime game fans were already burnt out from the genre. Bandai Namco alone had already put out 6 anime arena fighting games within the 5 years prior to Jujutsu Kaisen's announcement. And, to be fair, it's not great to write off an entire genre, but the problem was that most of these arena fighting games, and even releases prior to these, always followed these same poor trends. A rushed product simply meant to cash in on a popular IP with poor, repetitive gameplay, cheap visuals, and an overall lack of content. And people were already speculating that Jujutsu Kaisen Cursed Clash would be no different. And who could have guessed? They were right. Jujutsu Kaisen Cursed Clash released worldwide on February 2nd, 2024 for Nintendo Switch, PS4 and 5, Xbox One and Series X, and PC via Steam. It received mainly negative reviews and even became a meme. It sits at a 44 critic score and a 4.3 user score on Metacritic. It became a real trend to hate on this game, with a number of jokes popping up like, "Nah, I'd refund," and "Throughout heaven and earth, I alone am the scammed one." There was even a whole conspiracy theory going around that it set the record for the most refunded Steam game of all time. Now that wasn't actually ever true, but the fact that so many people had an easy time believing it was should tell you something about this game's reception. And I was no exception. I released my own review, largely complaining about the game's many flaws. Sure, it had some positives here and there, but it was clearly just released to profit off Jujutsu Kaisen's popularity. The game released for $60 with additional, more expensive editions and already announced DLC. From this page alone, you could tell what kind of game this is going to be. So let's take a closer look into what Bandai Namco believed $60 was worth. Jujutsu Kaisen Cursed Clash is a 2v2 arena fighting game developed by Viking, who you might know from the work on the My Hero Academia games, Once Justice and Ultra Rumble. But the closest comparison I can make for Cursed Clash is to J-Star's Victory Versus, with its 2v2 focus and its large destructible arenas. But Jujutsu Kaisen Cursed Clash does have its own unique gameplay mechanics, at least unique in comparison to J-Star's. Cursed Clash's main mechanic has to do with cursed energy. You have a cursed energy meter that refills throughout each match and can also be leveled up during each match, giving you a larger energy pool to work with, as well as providing new moves to use. While your cursed energy will refill naturally over time, you can build up energy faster by performing basic combos. However, in order to level up your cursed energy meter, you need to perform extraction techniques. These techniques are akin to heavy attacks, and when landing them, increase your cursed energy meter. However, the big gimmick here is that these basic combos and extraction techniques do not deal damage whatsoever. Rather, only increase cursed energy. In order to deal damage, you need to land cursed techniques, which use up your cursed energy meter. I have some choice words to say about this mechanic. For starters, in my original review, I said this mechanic was unique, but many of you pointed out that this is basically how Final Fantasy Dissidia works, and they would be correct. So Cursed Clash's gameplay isn't some new invention. As some of you also pointed out, this damage system doesn't really make much sense for the canon anyways. In Jujutsu Kaisen, the rule is that in order to exercise a curse, you must use a curse, either a cursed technique, cursed tool, or cursed energy. And I have 2 points here. 1, sorcerers in Jujutsu Kaisen are constantly reinforcing themselves with cursed energy anyways, so they can still exercise curses. And 2, most of the playable characters in this game are sorcerers, so they'll be taking damage all the time regardless. But even aside from canon rules, this gameplay just really isn't for me. While it's a novel, albeit not unique, mechanic, the execution just isn't great. But having only a couple of your moves, and special moves at that, deal damage, the combat just isn't very rewarding, and there's no real weight to it. You can combo an enemy with basic attacks and extraction techniques, and you end up dealing no damage whatsoever. It makes you feel like for the vast majority of each match, you aren't actually doing anything. You're not having an effect on how the match is progressing overall, and you really just end up spamming the same moves over and over because they're the only ones that actually do anything. It doesn't help that the game just doesn't feel good to handle either. The basic movement is incredibly clunky and annoying to control. Even something as simple as turning or traversing these arenas is a pain. And speaking of these arenas, they aren't great. Some of them feel like they weren't even tested because there are some areas you can access, but not by just, jumping up there. On top of that, they're all destructible, but it's the kind where just running through these arenas will start tearing everything up around you, and your screen gets all cluttered with random debris and effects everywhere. It's just an eyesore. No matter how much time I spend with this gameplay, I just can't get into it. The characters are another story though. While mixed things have been said about Viking's work with My Hero Academia, one thing that seemingly most people can agree on is that their characters tend to have pretty distinct movesets, and that's still true here as well. Each of the 16 playable characters at launch had their own mechanics and quirks to them, no pun intended. It made learning new characters something worth pursuing. It also kept matches interesting because you never knew what could happen. For example, Sukuna's attacks damage not only the enemies, but also your teammates. So one time I used my domain, and I hit not only the enemy Nobara, but also my teammate Megumi. There are also joint attacks that, when executed with certain pairings, will play unique cutscenes. It's nothing revolutionary, but it's a nice addition for fans who want to come up with their ideal teams. But the downside of the characters is that the roster overall was just very weak, especially considering the timing of this game's release. The game launched with only 16 characters, only covering Season 1 of the anime and the Zero movie. For now, let's ignore the fact that Season 2 had already aired by the time this game released. 16 characters is a small roster, and there were a number of characters in the covered arcs that weren't included. Mekamaru, Kamo, Mai, Miwa, Momo. Now would they be added later after launch? Yes, but why were they not here to begin with? Considering the story only covered Season 1, the Goodwill arc is a pretty big part of that, and to not include almost all the Kyoto students is a weird choice. Speaking of the story mode here is pretty awful. While there are a couple of 3D animated cutscenes, most of the story is told through PowerPoints and screenshots. And might I add, these screenshots aren't even presented well. Like, at least in One's Justice, they had some flair to it. It looked like a comic book. Here it genuinely just looks like a PowerPoint with nothing to it. And of course, all the battles here are just regular battles, nothing special, no gameplay variations, but there are relationship statuses, if that interests you for some reason. But what other game modes do we have to check out? There's the online, which, as you can probably imagine, didn't run very well. As with most Bandai Namco anime game releases, the netcode wasn't great. It was also pretty lacking in ways to play, with all the matches being forced into 2v2s, with no options for 1v1s. However, additionally online, there is the online co-op mode, which sees you teaming up with a friend or CPU ally to fight waves of enemies in a roguelike fashion. There's some interesting mechanics like the binding valve system that allows you to receive buffs at the cost of other debuffs. It's a nice addition and is a welcome switch up from the standard battles. My problem with it is that it just highlights the fact that there's no local multiplayer in this game whatsoever. It would have been nice to be able to team up with a friend locally to complete these challenges, but I guess that's asking for too much from a $60 game in 2024. What's also asking for too much apparently is good visual design. While the graphics aren't the worst thing in the world, they aren't great either, but the worst part of the visuals has to be the UI and menu design. The home page is literally just text boxes over the anime opening. It looks like a DVD menu. And on launch, there wasn't even a proper character select screen for free battles. There were a lot of flaws on launch. Clearly. And it didn't help that Bandai was valuing this game at $60. That's the thing, if it was just at a cheaper price point, then I don't think it would have gotten nearly as much hate as it did. But that being said, Bandai wasn't ready to give up on this game. Over the next year, they released a number of paid DLC and free updates in an attempt to keep this game alive. But did any of the new additions actually fix this game fundamentally? Or were they really just trying to get a couple more bucks? Bandai Namco and Baiking released 4 free updates and 2 paid DLC packs. The free updates included new characters, stages, and even a new game mode. The free characters included Mai, Momo, Mekamaru, Kamo, and Miwa. The characters I complained about before, and the characters I complained about in my first video. Neat. The new stages included stages from the arcs that were covered by the DLC, that being the Hidden Inventory arc and the Shibuya Incident arc. And the new game mode was a pretty lackluster arcade mode. There are 4 routes you can take, they're the same across all characters, and you just fight in these matches in order. Now that's it. But it's still nice to get new content, especially free characters. The fact these characters were free, and were all from Season 1 arcs, leads me to believe they were planned to be in the base game from the start, but were cut due to time constraints. And to that I say, why was this being rushed out to begin with? Oh, because the second season had finished airing, and they needed to release it while the franchise was still relevant, so they could rake in as much cash as possible. Gotcha. Which leads me to the paid DLC. The 2 DLC packs included 3 new characters each, as well as new story content. Let's start with the Hidden Inventory / Premature Death arc. For characters, it includes Teen Gojo, Teen Geto, and Toji. I'm not the biggest fan of alternate versions of characters already included in the game. It gets redundant rather quickly, but in this case, I don't really think there are many other options for the Hidden Inventory arc, unless you want to include that cloning guy or the old dude. But the story content, man, it stinks. It is 3 battles in total, with some cutscenes, all of which are the same crappy screenshot presentations. It took me 20 minutes in total to beat. There are absolutely no 3D cutscenes, and the cutscenes that are here move at a breakneck pace. It's clearly not meant for newcomers to the arc, but if you've already watched this arc, then it's not worth it for you either. These 20 minutes of gameplay, along with 3 characters, is supposedly worth $20, a whole third of the entire base game. That doesn't really seem right to me. The next DLC pack release was the Shibuya incident, and it was definitely an improvement over the Hidden Inventory. It also came with 3 new characters, Nobito, Mei, and Chozo, along with new story content. This time, the story took me about an hour to beat, with many more battles. Unfortunately, the cutscenes were of the same quality, but at least this time they're unique battles. There are a number of battles here against enemies who aren't playable characters, such as Dagon, Urume, and even Mahoraga. That being said, most of these battles are still just regular battles. The only battle that actually has some unique mechanic to it is against Mahoraga, but even then it's pretty lame. The gimmick here is that you have to deplete Mahoraga's health bar 3 times, but each time he adapts to one of your curse techniques. It's cool in theory, but in practice it just means that in round 1 you spam curse technique 1, in round 2 you spam curse technique 2, and in round 3 you just hit him with your ultimate once and you win. On that point, all of these matches, Hidden Inventories too, are just piss easy. You just spam the same moves over and over and then you win. I appreciate the inclusion of these unique matchups, but they honestly just cause even more problems. For one, I find it funny how certain battles just aren't included. Like there's no match between Megumi and Toji. I have to imagine it's because Bandai's being petty. You see, you have to pay for these 2 DLCs separately, so if you only bought Shibuya, then Bandai does not want you interacting with Toji whatsoever. My other problem is that it just leaves me asking why these additional characters aren't playable. I can understand Mahoraga, as cool as that would be. I get that there are probably difficulties with balancing him or whatever, but you're telling me they went out of their way to model and design movesets for Dagon and Urume, but they aren't playable? Did they really have a limit of only 3 characters per DLC? What happened to the free characters? Where's the kindness gone? Well, when it came to the DLC, they were never really kind to begin with. I really hate when developers and publishers do this, but when they first release a game, they release multiple editions. Of course, there's the standard, which is just the base game, but then you get stuff like the deluxe or the ultimate edition. It's usually just extra useless junk, but more often than not, the deluxe and ultimate editions will come bundled with DLC. Now, the DLC won't be available at launch, but you'll be entitled to it when it does release. And Cursed Clash was no exception. The deluxe and ultimate editions promise to include the Hidden Inventory DLC. Now, I want you to look at that wording carefully there. It only promises the Hidden Inventory DLC, not the Shibuya Incident DLC. That's going to be another separate transaction for $20. I hate when games do this. They're like, oh, if you buy the deluxe edition, you get the DLC Season Pass. Then when the Season Pass has released like 3 characters, they announced Season Pass 2, which of course wasn't included in the initial deluxe edition. That was only Season Pass 1, silly. So let's break down the pricing here specifically and see what Bandai values the complete package as. Let's say you buy the base game, that's going to be $60, but you want the extra DLC, that's $40, $20 for Hidden Inventory, and $20 for Shibuya. But of course, there's some extra costumes for purchase as well, $7 here, $2 there, and a final $10. So if you want all the characters, all the story content, all the cosmetics, that's going to run you a total of $119. You tell me, is that worth it? I sure as hell don't think so, and I sure as hell would never pay that. I bought a physical copy of the game for $25, and then bought both DLC packs for $40, for a grand total of $65, which, in my eyes, is still a scam. Stuff like the Season 2 arcs and characters should have just been in the game to begin with, or, at the very least, have been free updates like the Kyoto students. But the question remains, did these updates and DLC actually do anything to fix the game? No. The player base fell off a couple weeks after the game was released and never came close to its initial high. The updates and DLC that did release
didn't fix any of the fundamental flaws with this game. The free characters were nice, but the game still plays and looks the exact same. The new story content was presented just as lazily as before, the arcade mode is a nothing burger, and the DLC is overpriced. Not to mention the online is essentially unplayable these days because no one is playing the game to begin with.
You'd think by now that Bandai would learn releasing games with this business model is a recipe for failure. But nope.
Bandai never learns because they probably still made a profit off of this game. They don't care if the player base tanks after a week, they don't care how memed on a game gets, they don't care about the critical backlash because fans will still eat it all up. Cursed Clash was never fixed. Bandai simply tried to cover up its flaws with flashy new characters without actually changing anything. In its current state, this game is still not worth it. It may be on sale if you're a big Jujutsu Kaisen fan, but even then, I wouldn't want to be supporting this game, especially the DLC. Those are not worth $20 a pop.
With Jujutsu Kaisen's third season currently airing, it's only a matter of time before a new Jujutsu Kaisen home console game releases. And I can only hope it won't suffer the same fate as this one. But you know what's really funny to me? There's been speculation that Cursed Clash is going to be receiving Culling Games DLC. The last update was in 2024. That is not happening.